On August 30th, 1743, in Philadelphia, a clerk worked his way down a list of newly arrived foreigners, taking each man's oath. Beside the name he wrote down as Gaspar Glattfelder, he made a small note. The man was sick that day.
From the Caspar Glattfelder Association of America, this is the Glattfelder Gazette, Season 1, Episode 2.
That is the first written record of Caspar Glattfelder in America. Not a triumphant arrival, a sick man swearing an oath he was required to swear, on a list with dozens of other tired strangers, on the worst possible day to be standing in line. Almost everyone listening to this is descended from that man. The whole family, all the Glattfelters and Gladfelters and Glottfelties and Clodfelters, every name in the record runs back to a Swiss farmer who began his American life too ill to enjoy it. It is worth knowing how he got to that line and what it cost him to be standing in it. Caspar was born in 1709 in Glattfelden, a small town about 12 miles north of Zurich, where his family had lived for generations. He was a farmer, baptized and raised in the Swiss Reformed Church, married to a woman named Elizabeth Laufer. By the spring of 1743, they had decided to leave, and they were not the only ones. 6 families from that one small parish made the same decision that spring, packing up to cut themselves loose from the only world they knew, in favor of one 3,000 miles away, about which they knew next to nothing. Caspar's household held more than the people you would expect. Traveling with Caspar, Elizabeth, and their 4 surviving children, Margaret, Solomon, Anna, and baby John, was Elizabeth's father, Hans Jacob Laufer, who was 70 years old. A man of 70 in 1743 had agreed to be loaded onto a riverboat and then a sailing ship for a crossing that routinely killed people half his age. He was not going to start a farm in Pennsylvania. He was going because his daughter was going, and a family of that kind did not leave its grandfather behind. They traveled the way most of the Swiss did, down the Rhine to Rotterdam slowly, paying tolls at every petty border along the river. At Rotterdam, they boarded a ship called the Francis and Elizabeth for the ocean. The crossing usually took somewhere between 7 and 12 weeks, packed below decks in conditions that bred sickness and ran short on food and clean water. People got on those ships knowing the risk. They counted it against the life they thought was waiting and decided the risk was worth it. The 6 Glattfelden families did not cross alone, which is part of why the losses are so hard to count precisely. They moved as a small convoy of relatives and neighbors. With Caspar's household came Elizabeth's sister, Dorothy, and her husband, Henry Walter, and the widow and 6 children of Caspar's own older brother, John Peter, who had died the year before he could make the trip himself. Whole families boarded the Francis and Elizabeth together. Some of them did not come off it. The papers that survive were never meant to be a casualty list. They are oath rolls and land deeds, and the dead turn up in them only as names that stop appearing. For Caspar's family, the risk came due. By the time the Francis and Elizabeth reached Philadelphia in August, old Hans Jacob Laufer was no longer with them. We know this not from any record of his death, but from its absence. Pennsylvania had required since 1727 that every foreign male 16 and older take 2 oaths upon landing, one of allegiance to the King of Great Britain and one of fidelity to the proprietors of the colony. The lists of the men who swore those oaths survive. Laufer's name is not on the August 30th list, and the plain conclusion is the hard one. Elizabeth's 70-year-old father had died somewhere on the Atlantic and been buried at sea, the way so many were, with no stone and no grave a family could ever visit. He was almost certainly not the only one. The historian who pieced this together notes carefully that other members of the party may also have died on the way, and the evidence points hard at two of them. Elizabeth herself and the baby John, who was less than a year old when they left Glattfelden, disappear from the record right here. They either died on the crossing or very shortly after the family reached America. There is no death notice, no burial entry, nothing but a silence that falls over them at exactly this point and never lifts. The woman who, by family tradition, had been the one most set on making this crossing did not live to see what it brought. By the time Caspar Glattfelder stepped forward to swear his oath on August 30th, all of that had already happened to him. He was 34 years old. He had just spent the better part of 3 months at sea. He had very likely buried his wife's father in the ocean. He may already have lost, or been in the middle of losing, his wife and his infant son. He was, the clerk noted, sick, and he raised his hand and swore allegiance to a king he had never seen, in a colony he had never set foot in, because the alternative was to have crossed an ocean and given up his family for nothing. 5 men from Glattfelden swore the same oath beside him, the heads of the families that had set out together in the spring. There had been 6 families. The 6th had no man left to take the oath because Caspar's older brother John Peter had died before the journey even began. His widow and children had come anyway. That, too, is a story we will tell you, and it is the reason a whole branch of this family ended up in the South under a name you might not recognize. The oath itself says something about the bargain these people were making. Pennsylvania did not ask them to love it. It asked them to pledge allegiance to the British Crown and fidelity to the Penn family who owned the colony, and in return it let them stay, buy land, and build. It was a transaction more than a welcome. Most of Caspar's fellow Germans and Swiss swore it the same way, tired and wary, trading the old country's certainties for a new one's open questions. Caspar swore it sick. Then he went to work. That is what a beginning actually looks like. We like to picture the immigrant striding off the boat full of hope and possibility, but the truer picture is a worn-out, grieving, physically ill man doing the next required thing on the worst day of his life, because stopping was a luxury he could not afford. He was sick and bereaved, having bet everything and watched part of the bet die in the water, and he kept moving anyway. What came after is the reason you are listening to this. Caspar did not turn around. Within 2 weeks of landing, he had bought land, a story we will come to. He remarried to a woman named Anna Maria, whose maiden name the records never preserved, and he started his family again from almost nothing. He fathered 6 sons in all, 1 born back in the old country and 5 here in the new. And from those sons came 55 grandchildren, and from them the more than 50,000 living descendants who carry his blood today under a dozen spellings of his name. All of it grew from a man who arrived sick and grieving and refused to quit. There is a quiet lesson in that, and it is not the greeting card kind. We tend to assume that the people who started things, who crossed the oceans and founded the families and built what we inherited, did it from a position of strength. Caspar did it from about the lowest point a person can occupy. He had bet his whole life on this crossing and watched it take from him before he even reached dry land. And the record shows him, on that exact day, doing the small, ordinary thing in front of him anyway, raising his hand and signing on for a country he had no reason yet to trust. Most beginnings carry a loss folded inside them. The new job that opened because the old one ended. The move that pulled you away. Most beginnings carry a loss folded inside them. The new job that opened because the old one ended. The move that pulled you away from people you loved. The fresh start that was only necessary because something broke first. Casper's arrival is this family's founding moment, and it was soaked in grief from the first hour. That did not make it less of a beginning. If anything, it is the truest thing the family knows about where it came from. We started not from triumph, but from a sick man at the edge of the water who decided, against every reason to quit, to begin.
If these stories mean something to you, share them with your family and invite them to subscribe. It's free at glattfelder.news/subscribe. Whatever your last name is today, Glattfelder, Glattfelter, Clodfelter, Gladfelter. This is where the family sits down and talks to itself about where it came from. Speak the names again.